All right. Okay.
Okay. So hi, Frank. Thank you for your time. So my first question is, we didn't see any unified rule of the personal data cross-border flow regulation. So there is a EU one and there is an American one, and China is like following. So what's the feature of the EU one and the American one? And what's the ideal one for the international community?
Yeah. So you're talking now about data transfers, right?
Yes, yes. Personal data cross-border transfer regulation.
Okay. So you have within the GDPR regulation provisions dealing with data transfer. Those provisions say that that data can be transferred, data on individuals within the EU can be transferred. And by the way, this also applies to people of other nationalities who reside in the EU. So even Chinese nationals are protected by this legislation. The point is that the GDPR data transfer rules say that companies that take that data from EU residents can transfer that data outside the EU only if certain conditions are met. There can be an adequacy decision taken by the European Union, which says that the country we call data import, let's say China, has rules which are sufficiently protective of the data, maybe not exactly the same as GDPR, but deemed to be sufficiently protective to allow those transfers to take place, okay? An adequacy decision, or there could be clauses, contractual clauses between the company exporting the data, the company importing the data, saying that that the data importer intends to protect the data to an approximate level like the GDPR protects it. And if those kinds of conditions can't be met, then you have more radical means of doing it, such as obtaining the consent of the individual to the data transfer. But even that consent is valid only if he is made aware of the potential risk of what can happen to that data in the country to which it is transferred. So what that means in the case of China, for example, which has no adequacy decision over here, is in light of the fact that standard contractual clauses probably will not work because the company in China won't be able to say that that data is going to be treated with approximately the same kind of protection as in the EU, that the individual consent would be based upon being told that that data can be acquired by government, ministries, or entities in China upon demand, or if certain requirements are met, whatever the standard is in China, they would have to be made aware that that risk exists. Otherwise, the consent is invalidated. So in a way, all right, Chinese companies are having the same issues that American companies now have because of the Schrems II judgment of the European Court. And as you might know, that case was sent back to the Irish Data Protection Commissioner, which at the end of August sent Facebook a preliminary order saying that Facebook must stop transferring personal data to the US because the US shield has been deemed by the court to be invalid. Standard contractual clauses that Facebook has are deemed to be invalid. It has not obtained the consent of its users to the transfer of the data to the US. They have not informed EU residents of what could happen to their data. So basically, Facebook ran out of luck. And the DPC in Ireland was compelled on the basis of the European Court judgment to order Facebook to stop making these transfers. The order is not yet public. We just know this from several sources, including Nick Clegg, who, as you know, is a senior executive and public spokesperson for Facebook. We know that Facebook is now threatening the EU to withdraw its service to EU subscribers, as is threatening to do this unless they back down. I'm not so sure the DPC in Ireland will, and certainly the court can't anytime soon, because you would need another case in front of the court to invalidate the Schrems II judgment. So that's not going to happen anytime soon. So we are in a very difficult moment for companies doing business in the EU, where they must choose what happens with their data. Now, I don't want you to think that Chinese companies or American companies are in a hopeless situation. They're not, because even if they can't give the consent to their individuals, right, the subscribers and so on, customers, if they can't do that, if the standard contractual clauses are invalid and there's no adequacy decision, there are several other possibilities. And those are, number one, you don't transfer the data outside the EU, you keep it in a data center within the EU. That's one option. The other option is that the data is transferred, but it goes to a country with whom the EU has an adequacy decision. So that could be, for example, Japan, New Zealand. I'm sure there are several others that the EU believes are sufficiently safe harbors for personal data. Those are other possibilities. So basically, all this requires is a bit of a rethink on the part of companies as to how they're going to deal with the personal data. I mean, it doesn't have to be so complicated, in other words. For a company like Facebook, the problem for them, obviously, is that they are using that data for all kinds of purposes in the States. And then it's going from the States to even other third countries to be used for marketing purposes, for all kinds of things. It's being sold to other companies for various purposes. So for them, the Schrems II ruling can seriously affect their bottom line. The fact that Facebook now might have to consider keeping that data within the EU. You're talking about, I don't know how many millions of Facebook subscribers in the EU, and Facebook in the States can't use that data. That's gotta hurt Facebook. But I think for a lot of other companies that are industrial, for a lot of other companies that are even in the high-tech space, for whom the data is not so terribly important, really. They collect it, but it isn't really, how should I say, necessarily helping their bottom line. They just have to figure out, okay, so if we can't transfer it back to China, we'll do something else with it instead. How expensive can it be for a serious company to deal with that data in a more creative way that is compliant for the time being with this Schrems II judgment? I mean, the situation may well change in the future, right? and the EU backs off from this position. But for now, I really don't think it's much of a, I don't think it's a huge deal for most companies to have to deal with this.
Yeah, I would like to have a comment, like an overview comment, to see the whole picture, because there is no why how to say, everyone agreed regulation. The EU has its own one, like GDPR. It's focused on the personal privacy, but American focus on the how say the hegemony to keep the leading position in the market. So we see it as kind of hegemony. So and China is kind of starting its own regulation, but it hasn't been formed. So what's your point of view? Because when we talk about regulation, we see two perspectives. One is from practice perspective, that everyone has a motive to keep its to protect its own interest. The other one is the ideology, like EU is focusing on the personal privacy, but China doesn't do that so much, and so does American companies. So what's the big picture here? Because we see three different types.
I don't know what you mean by the big picture. I mean, I'm an EU specialist in data privacy and antitrust. That's what I do. I can't speak for other countries. I can't speak for China. I can't speak for the US in terms of what the government is doing or not doing. What I can speak to are the legal ramifications of EU regulation, court judgments, legislation, and how I would advise clients. That's what I can do. I'm not a politician, so I don't know what you expect me to say.
Okay. So let's speak of EU's perspective. Why it is so important to
go after data? Why do they consider data so important?
Yeah, why they consider data so important? And the second question is why we need to keep data keep it in our own domestic, in our own territory. And is it about the sovereignty, a new kind of sovereignty?
Yeah. Okay. So the answer to your first question, the data privacy, the issue of data privacy is a big issue here. You know that. Much more so than in the States, actually. More than in the United States. And the reason for that stems from the fact that a good portion of the EU consists of countries which were at one time part of the Soviet Union or greatly influenced by them. Satellites. You had East Germany, Bulgaria, Romania, Poland, Hungary, and there are other member states as well. These are member states now, right? And 25 years ago, until 25 years ago, they were basically run from Moscow. So you had a situation then where a number of these countries within the EU had no respect for personal privacy data. There were spies, right? You had the Stasi in East Germany. A lot of people still remember this. they're young enough to remember this, and so consequently, when you began to see companies like Google, Facebook, Amazon, and others begin to profit from and share this data, this kind of woke up those people to what they had lived in during the Cold War. Mm. And then for the rest of the EU, France, UK, Italy, Spain, and so on, they may not have lived that Cold War, but they understood it. And so consequently, when these countries from Eastern Europe revolted to the exploitation of their data, So did the West, and it became an EU issue. Your second question relating to sovereignty, I don't think it's a sovereignty issue as such. I think that what is going on here is simply that the EU is trying to protect the data privacy of its own residents as best it can. So if you have a situation where you have companies within the EU who are prohibited from breaking the various rules that are in the GDPR, if they can't do it, but other companies from the US, from Japan, from China, if they're able to come into the EU and do whatever they want with the data, it creates an unequal playing field in a way, at least as regards to the data. So the thinking behind these data transfer rules is to equalize the playing field for all companies that are doing business in the EU and taking personal data. So that to me is not a sovereignty issue. You might consider it a sovereignty issue because it inconveniences companies from China or from the States when they're doing business in the EU. But it doesn't inconvenience them any more than it inconveniences European companies who have to live by the same rules. The problem for other countries like China and America is that they don't have the same rules in their own countries. So they see this, and I understand it. I understand it 100%. They see it as a sovereignty issue. They see it as a trade issue. They see it as an infringement of their own freedoms to do business in the EU. When I don't know, I could understand that, but in a way, it's subjective. It's subjective because if you flip things around, let's say, and this is a stupid argument, but you'll follow me, okay? Let's say that
Sorry, I can't hear you. I think I don't know whose network is.
Frank. Sorry.
I can't hear you. I can't hear.
掉线了。
谁掉线？他掉线是吧？
rules for driving on the road.
天哪！
It's unstable connection.
Sorry, Frank.
Can you hear me now?
No,
Can you hear me now?
We've lost you. We've lost you since you say that this is a stupid argument, but do you follow me?
Yeah. Okay.
We've lost
All
you
right. So here,
Okay.
let me tell you the stupid argument. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right. Here's the stupid argument. All right. So let's say that China, for public safety purposes, has the strictest rules for driving in the world. The strictest rules to protect people on the road. So if you drive in China and you're over the speed limit, even by 5 kilometers an hour, the camera gets you and you get a ticket for, say, $200. But here in the EU, or in Belgium, for example, you can safely drive 10 kilometers an hour over the speed limit. And even if the cameras are watching you, they will not ticket you. They will give you 10 additional kilometers an hour. Okay? Now, say I rent a car. I rent a car in China, and I'm on the freeway, okay? And I'm thinking, hey, China's got to be reasonable, like Belgium. I'm going to push, then say the speed limit is 120 in China, 120. I'm driving 130. But in China, you have much more strict rules regarding driving safely. So China decides, I'm sorry, but you're over the speed limit. The speed limit says 120. We'll give you 5. We're not going to give you 10. So I get a ticket for 2,000 RMB. I'm feeling, hey, you're unreasonable, China. I mean, at home, I could drive 10 kilometers an hour over the speed limit. Why are you being so unreasonable? You're discriminating against me as a foreign driver. I resent that. Well, China says, well, sorry, guy, Frank, but everyone drives here has to live with these rules. So why am I treating you so unfairly? Because you have lousy law enforcement where you come from?
Yes, but there is a context because there is not many cars from the European countries driving on the highway like the American do, and like maybe the future the Chinese companies do, right? So that's a problem that everyone is complaining.
But you understand the argument. So it's a very similar argument. Why aren't I entitled to drive in the way that I drive in Belgium in China? Well, you can't. You have to follow the rules in the country where you're going. So it's the same, it is really the same thing. So this argument of sovereignty and how dare China offend me this way by telling me I can't drive like I do at home on Chinese roads. Sorry, but it's just, these are the rules of the game.
Yeah.
You know, so, and so when you're in a situation like that, I think the smart thing to do is not to throw up all these patriotic, pseudo-patriotic arguments about sovereignty and say, hey, let's get smart. This is what we have to deal with. This is what we have to deal with. How do we deal with it effectively? How do we deal with it so that we're legal and it doesn't cost us much to do this in the right way? That's how I think that is how smart companies think. It was the same thing with antitrust, you know, over here when we introduced EU antitrust. All these companies say, "Oh, but we're used to doing cartels. We're used to predatory pricing and all these things." And the EU said, "No, no, 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 no. These are the rules now. You adapt." Everybody, European companies, American companies, anybody doing business had to adapt to the antitrust rules. Now here we are, you know, it didn't take too long, by the way, Julia, it didn't take too long. It took maybe 5-10 years and everybody got used to it. This is the way we do business in the EU from an antitrust perspective. It's gonna be the same thing with data privacy. People are gonna be upset and they're gonna raise the flag, you know, sovereignty, sovereignty. But everybody does this. It's not just the EU. Everybody does it, right?
Yes,
and
yes.
It's easy to accuse the other country of being protectionistic, whatever. I don't really buy into that.
Okay. Yeah, but if we because EU is a fair play field for everyone, but if we compete abroad, like compete in the American market and in the Chinese market, the EU, it might be a shackle for the EU companies. The EU
What is a shackle?
because they grow in a very strict. They used to drive like in 5, but in American China, everyone is driving at 50. So they can't drive so fast as others at the same place, and then at the how to say once they enter the market, right? So that's the shackle. What I mean for the EU companies. What's your point on that?
Well, look, I mean, I don't think it's a shackle on Chinese companies to do business over here. If that's where you
it's a shackle for your own homegrown companies.
For homegrown companies?
Yeah.
Well, of course, it's an inconvenience. Of course, it's an inconvenience, but so is antitrust, right? That's why you have all these companies that have antitrust compliance programs over here. Compliance programs. They have manuals. They have training with the executives, with salespeople, showing them this is what you can and cannot do, or you subject the company to heavy fines, right? Cartels, abuse of dominant position. and everything else. These are rules that you have to live with when you're doing business in a particular country. Now, of course, everybody has antitrust, so no one talks about that anymore. I imagine it's just a matter of time before most of the developed world will have data privacy, more or less on the same level. I think the challenge is going to be to make sure that these rules make sense. Because if the rules themselves are counterproductive, if they're not really protecting privacy, or if they're protecting elements of privacy which perhaps don't even deserve to be protected because maybe the information is already public, that's another debate. That's a separate debate. We're working under the assumption that the rules are fair. Fair as regards to the protection of individual privacy. We can talk for hours about whether the rules themselves are fair, whether they're adequately protecting privacy or overprotecting them. But if you start from the premise that we simply have these rules, like we have antitrust, it's one more layer of compliance. It's one more layer of compliance. You have things like sexual harassment, environmental protection, trust, now data privacy. Now, I'm aware, because I've been working with the Chinese now for some years, I'm aware that many Chinese companies are ignoring GDPR, ignoring it. I know this from my own personal experience and observation. The reason I think they're ignoring it is not because they don't understand it. It's not even because they reject it as something illegitimate, unfair. The reason why they're not complying with GDPR, in my experience, again, I can't speak for other, in my experience, is because they think they can get away with it. Yeah.
Until they get fined, like.
Yeah, exactly. The reason is because, unlike antitrust, the enforcement mechanisms over here are not yet sufficient. They have too many cases, not enough people to investigate. That is the problem. So you do have a situation where, because these are EU regulations, a lot of European companies have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on GDPR compliance, hiring outside lawyers to do this. Many American companies feel the same way. We're going to spend the money. Banks, insurance companies, of course, high tech, the internet platforms, they've all spent a lot of money on GDPR compliance. And I do know, without naming names, certain very top tier Chinese companies which have done it too, which have done the GDPR work. But I can tell you, my feeling is that 80%, perhaps even, of Chinese companies doing business here have done next to nothing.
Are they top tier ones, or is there any top tier ones among them, or they are just the small companies?
I'm sorry, please.
The dodgy one you mentioned, are they all top tier Chinese companies, or just small ones?
Yeah, okay, I would describe these companies as second, third tier.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot of them, and a number of them have heavy investments here, and I could think of one. I won't name names. I'm not going to allow you to do this.
I have no interest.
No, I know one major Chinese bank, a major Chinese bank, because I was involved in this, which decided to downplay the effects of GDPR considerably, and to minimize the amount of work that they were going to do. And they minimized it to such a level that I thought, oh my Lord, I mean, because they are exposed But I'm sure the thinking is, well, until we see major Chinese fines, I mean, fines against Chinese companies, so what? Why do we need to spend the money? And I understand that thinking. I understand that thinking, but I think that thinking will change. It'll change because for the EU to maintain this GDPR regime, and for people, meaning companies, to take it seriously, they're going to have to spend more money on the enforcement. So when it's going to happen, I really don't know. Of course, you have the economic effects of the pandemic. So a lot of these countries are struggling right now economically. But I don't think GDPR is going to go away. I feel pretty sure about. It's not going to go away. And if anything, what's going to happen in the next couple of years is an increase in enforcement. So I think maybe for now, Chinese companies looking at the risk factor might think they're not going to come after us. That could change. And of course, a number of companies also think that they're immune you even find out. Can you hear me?
Hi, excuse me, Frank. Hello. Hi, Frank.
I hear you.
Hi, Frank. Sorry, excuse me. I think we just have 3 to 4 minutes. I don't think Shen still has a lot of questions on the list. I'm not sure if she still have time to log in if we stop.
I don't. I'm gonna have to go soon.
Oh, so
I have an outside appointment. I've got an outside.
I honestly, I have a lot of questions to ask. Is it possible that we have another time?
Yeah, we can do it. Sure.
Sorry,
Okay,
always get your time, but it's very inspiring.
Yeah.
So let's make a time.
But I'm sorry. It's my fault in a way because I had it in my head.
No.
No problem at all.
We are really
we're going to do this call.
time. It's just I like talking to you so much because and we are talking that ideas that popped up. So I
Frank is the visiting professor in China University of my mother's school.
That's a good thing.
You are the visiting professor.
Yeah.
My school, I graduated from China University of Politics and Economics.
All right. Good.
Right. So let's make another appointment. It's okay.
Sure.
Let me know what time it will be okay for you today. Later a bit.
Maybe another day. That any time that suits you. Yeah.
How about Friday? How about Friday?
Right. So how about I email you, and if you feel any time suitable for you, reply to me, please.
Friday's a good day.
Friday.
Friday. 可以吗？
可以。
Okay. We'll talk later. All right.
Okay. All right, my dear. Okay.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you very much.
See you soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.